to lesson 3.7. Today we're talking about dividing decimals. So if it sounds like we're getting kind of repetitive, it's because we are, right? We've talked about dividing a decimal by a whole number. We talked about dividing a whole number by a decimal. And now we're talking about dividing a decimal by a decimal. So we've kind of been working our way up to this. If you were able to handle dividing a whole number by a decimal, then you'll be able to handle this as well. So hopefully it's not going to confuse you too much, but what I'm going to do today as well is I'm going to use a model to kind of show you what that's going to look like. So we're going to use a decimal grid, and we'll see just what we're doing and why it works out the way it does. So we're going to go ahead and get started. But before we do, let's think about a time that this might be useful. Let's say that you have $3.35 and you're going to buy something that's 35 cents and you want to see how much you can buy, right? Because you're not always going to have just a clean $5 bill in your pocket. You might have some change floating around and you want to buy as much as you can with it. So an example like this, if we have something like $3.35, so we have a whole number and some change, and we're going to divide that by something that costs 35 cents, so maybe like an eraser or a piece of bubble gum or something, right? Then we're going to divide that decimal by the other decimal to get our answer. So it might sound kind of confusing. I'm going to write some things down, and we'll do our PBIL section and get started, and that'll clear things up. So let's go ahead and take a look at your PBIL section. You should be in your PBIL section, and what we're going to do is I'm going to put the problem on the board, and I will read that. And from there, we're going to solve the problem using a decimal grid, just so we can visually see what we're doing when we actually do the math problem. So, I gave you I gave you a decimal grid in class, so go ahead and make sure that's in your PBIL section so you can work alongside me. And I'm going to go ahead and put the problem on the board now. AJ buys erasers for his pencils. Each eraser costs 20 cents. The total cost is $1.20. How many erasers does AJ buy? Use decimal models on your teaching tool to help you divide. Okay, so we've got a problem here, and now we're going to solve it using decimal grids. In using our decimal grids, I'm going to first write the numbers back up here so we can see. We know that each eraser costs 20 cents, and the total cost was $1.20. So I'm going to write that we spent 1.2, right? So we spent $1.20. How much did each eraser cost? Well, each eraser was 0.2, or 20 cents. Oh, we're still off the screen. So each eraser is 20 cents, and total he spent $1.20. So how can we use the decimal grid to figure this out? Well, if we show $1.20 on a decimal grid, that means that we're going to have one whole. So I'm going to color in a whole grid, right? Because I have one whole decimal grid. If you're thinking of this as pennies, we have 100 pennies in a dollar, and each penny is 1/100th of a dollar. So when we have 100 pennies, we have $100. Mr. Hall's struggling to color this in. Make sure you're coloring this in with me. We might have to do that fancy speed up feature here on this part, just to make sure we don't take up forever on the video. Yeah, we're definitely going to speed this up. So hopefully yours looks a little bit neater than mine. So we're filling in $1.20 still. We have one whole, and now we need 0.2. And 0.2 is 2/10. So now we're going to fill in 1/10 and 2/10. So 2 rows is going to equal 2/10. Because if you remember, when you're using a decimal grid, we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 across. So if I fill in 2 of those rows that are going up and down, it's going to be 2 out of the 10, or 2/10. So now I've got my 1.2 on the decimal model. How many groups of 0.2 can I make? Because the problem is asking if he's spending $1.20 among 20, oh my goodness, around 20 That's some great writing, isn't it? Let's rewrite this here. So if he's spending, we'll do it down at the bottom. If he's spending, I'm going to take it for a second. Alright, and we're back. So if he's spending, down here at the bottom with me, he's spending $1.20, and he's spending 20 cents per eraser. We want to know how many erasers he can buy. It's the whole group that he's spending divided by how many he's grouping it into and how many can he buy. So we have this whole group again, it's the $1.20, and we want to know how many groups of 20 cents can we make. Well, on a decimal grid, all we have to do is just go through and circle how many columns of 2 we can make, right? So there's 1, there's a column of 2, that's 2, then we'll have 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 groups of 0.2 or 2/10 that we can make in this. So in our model, we can answer the question of 1.2 divided by 0.2 pretty easy, right? It's going to give us 6. Well, let's look at what that's going to look like if we solve it just mathematically using numbers. Here's the problem we just solved using the decimal grid, and we're going to solve this just like we solved in the last unit. I want to get rid of my decimal point on the divisor. So how do I do that? Well, I need to move my decimal point until I get to the end. So since there's a 0 there, I could just stop at the 2, but since it's 20 in this, we're going to just keep it at that. So I'm going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right on the divisor, so that means on the dividend, I also need to move my decimal point 2 places. Now when I do that, that's going to give me a new problem. And what the new problem is going to look like, make sure this is in your PBIL, don't erase, but below it, what you are going to end up with is 20 into 120. And that is an equivalent problem from the one we just did. So what I'm going to do is see how many times 20 will go into 1. It will not. 20 will not go into 12. How many times will 20 go into 120? Well, if I just drop off the zeros, I'm going to see that 2 will go into 12 6 times. So that means that 20 will go into 120 6 times. And 6 times 20 is 120. So, from the original problem, we can determine that this is going to be 6. So AJ is going to be able to buy 6 erasers. So again, our original problem was 100 or 1.2 divided by 0.2. So even though we have smaller numbers like 1.2 divided by 0.2, that's what's kind of cool with decimals is that we can make this a bigger number. And the reason the number is bigger is just like what we saw in the grids. It's grouping this 1.2 into groups of tenths. So we can make 6 groups of 2/10 from 1.2 because one whole is that much bigger than tenths. Go ahead and flip to your guided practice problems, and we'll do a couple more problems just to make sure we have everything cleared up. Here's our first problem for the guided practice. Remember, our main goal when dividing a decimal by a decimal is that we cannot have a decimal in the divisor, so we have to get rid of it. Well, how do we get rid of the decimal in 0.25? Well, we're just going to move it 2 places to the right. Whatever we do to the outside, we also have to do to the inside. So we're going to go 1, 2 to the right on the inside. That's going to give us a new equivalent problem of 25 into 125. So make sure that you had that written down in your notes, and I'm going to write our new problem that you should have written down below. And looking at this, 25 won't go into 1, and 25 will not go into 12. But 25 times 5 is 125. And that's just going to give us a simple answer of 5. So even though we started with the numbers of 1.25 and tried to divide it by 0.25, we saw that 0.25 will go into 1.25 5 times. So we can divide a decimal by a decimal and still end up with a whole number. We're going to do one more problem together and then you'll take your quiz. Here's number 2. It's going to kind of include things from the past 3 or 4 lessons, but I think we can handle it, so let's take a look. Remember, the first thing we want to do is get rid of the decimal in our divisor. So we're going to move that 1 2 places to the right. That means that we're going to move the decimal 2 to the right in our dividend as well. That's going to give us a new problem of 2 into 0.5. And remember, when we're dividing and there's a decimal left in the dividend, we're just going to move that straight upstairs to start off. So now we're going to solve just like normal. How many times will 2 go into 0? Well, it won't. How many times will 2 go into 0? It won't. How many times will 2 go into 5? Well, it'll go in twice. And 2 times 2 is 4. And remember, I can't finish or just leave this as a remainder of 1 because now we're working with decimals. So in order to finish solving the problem, I'm going to have to annex a 0 and bring that down. Now I'm left with how many times will 2 go into 10? Well, that's going to end up being 5. 2 times 5 is 10. And now, since we're zeroed out, we're done, and our answer is going to be 0.25 or 25 hundredths. Go ahead and take your quiz now. Email me your score, and we will clear up any confusions left in class tomorrow.